Hello everyone, we are today here at the Militärhistorisches Museum Dresden der Bundeswehr, and this is Jens Wehner.
Hello.
And we are here on a Leopard 1. Now, you know, I'm mostly aware of the Second World War tanks, so the Tiger, the Panther, the Königstiger. And this is also named after a big cat, but there's one major difference. We know that the Panther was very well armored, at least at the front, the Tiger was heavily armored, and the Königstiger even more so. And now we have the Leopard, which was very weakly armored in comparison. So for me, this breaks basically with the big cat tradition of the Germans. So Jens, what is the basic idea behind the Leopard 1 and the thinking of the time and the time frame?
I believe, because I have to say it's believing, because the documents are not all open yet. Yeah, I mean, there are experts like Rolf Hilmes who know a lot and so on and who say a lot, but I think it's not completely clear still today.
So not everything is declassified yet?
Yeah, I think the documents of the 50s are more or less declassified, but not everything, and the 60s are more complicated, I think. But besides of this, I think there are two routes of thinking behind this. One is that a Tiger tank, or a King Tiger, Tiger II as it was called by the Germans, is not really good fitting into operations maneuver warfare. And this was the concept that made Wehrmacht successful. So they had their great successes with Panzer III, Panzer IV, Panzer I, Panzer II. But I think Panzer III and Panzer IV are here the most major components of the tank force in this time. And they were quite capable of running over long distances. Yeah? If you look at France 1940, so the Panzers run from Sedan to the coast, to the Channel's coast. And I don't know if this would be possible so easily with a Tiger tank or even with a King Tiger or stuff like this. They were thinking in operation maneuver warfare thinking. The second route for this is, I think, the fire control system at this time. The fire controls at those times, let's say 50s, maybe beginning of the 60s, were not so much advanced from World War II. Meaning a fast tank was not so easily to hit, especially over greater distances. So speed could really be a protection. And so I think those are the two routes of Leopard 1. And I think there is a little third route even, because the Germans had already a Leopard tank in concept in World War II. It was a reconnaissance tank, was also not really heavyweight armored. It was a light tank because of its recon purpose, yeah. And so I think this is the third route of this. They had already a tank like this a little bit in mind. I mean, it was for recon, not as a main battle tank. But I think this is the third route you can see.
Could the fourth route be that at that time, basically, anti-tank weapons were so strong that basically you had to put so much armor on the tank that it was extremely slow or not really capable anymore, or not well suited to basically use mobility as protection, but also because if you get hit, the hit will basically destroy you, because this was before, I think, the time of composite armor.
Yeah, it was the time before composite armor. It was the time before computer, laser controlled fire control systems. But you see, tank and tank design has not so much to do with what is the truth. It has much to do with thinking and ideas. If you look at the contemporary British tank design, like the Chieftain, which was heavy armored and which was in many ways a little bit more like a Tiger, and let's say the Leopard 1 was a little bit more like the British tanks in North Africa in 1941 or so. So you see, both times, both nations changed their concept after World War II a little bit, or break it down at a different point. So if you look at French tank design at this time, it's also very lightweight design. If you look at American design, it's quite World War II fashioned, like Pershing also. It's of course advanced, but the 47 or M48 are in general concept are more like a World War II tank, like a Pershing or so. So you see, it's had very much to do with your thinking of the battlefield and what you imagine. And maybe the British thought we will have the victory with a standfast tank, with a tank that can defend, and Germans thought, no, we can also bring the victory with operations maneuver warfare. So as you see, it's thinking of concept behind this.
In that sense, actually, this would be traditional, because as Gross points out, the Germans, I think he called it, they always they knew.
Yeah, you're right.
They couldn't beat the Russians or the Soviets and the French and everyone on the battlefield. Mainly, they only had to with raw power, but they had to do it with Bewegung, with movement. So I think he said das Heil in der Bewegung or something in one of his articles. So where it's also you have the war of movement, because I think maneuver warfare is a bit of a different concept. So there's a bit debate here, and in that way it's actually again more on the tradition of the German army, but also as you pointed out, it's more in the tradition of the Panzer III and the Panzer IV, but not in the tradition of the big cats. So it's actually, you could say it's a very traditional tank or it's an anti-traditional tank, depending on which line of thought you follow. And basically also with the assumptions, which is always very interesting. So you have different assumptions what will happen on the battlefield, and sometimes you don't know. Sometimes the assumptions are correct and sometimes they're incorrect. I mean, what I found the most interesting one was in a book before the Second World War, and it was about the Luftwaffe, where they discussed about the heavy fighters, the Zerstörer. And it was basically, I think, the guy wrote down in one line, there are basically now two concepts for this plane. And the next war will show us which of the assumptions is correct and which is incorrect. So basically, we don't know if in the...
Yeah, if it comes to the Zerstörer of the Luftwaffe, you have to read my PhD thesis, which will hopefully end next year. They will have a bigger part in this. But no matter if you talk about Zerstörer from the Luftwaffe or if you talk about tank design, it's always what you have in mind for your future battlefield.
Yeah.
How will it look? What will be decisive to be successful on the battlefield? And I think the Germans, I think it's a very good idea to say the Leopard 1 is more or less more in the German tradition than the Tiger and the Panther. Because maneuver warfare. And even if you look at the later Leopard 2, which is of course heavy armored, but it's also quite fast. For such a heavy tank, it's quite fast, and I think that's interesting.
So basically, and also the assumptions and viewpoints of different countries can also make a lot more sense for them. For instance, like as pointed out in one of my videos, you have like for the Germans and the Soviets in the Second World War, the air forces are very focused on close air support, supporting operations. Whereas for the British and the Americans, they're more on the strategic side, basically because for the Germans and the Soviets, the enemy was already at the border. Whereas the Americans sit basically on an island, unless you count Canada and Mexico as a major threat, and the British also. So the whole view on this must also be brought into this thinking. So for one country, a certain assumption can make absolutely no sense, where for another country the same assumption perfectly fits from the strategic situation, and then comes into mind, besides the strategic considerations of the geography, then there comes in the industries. Can we support such a tank or not? The technology, then the training, the whole army and agriculture. So a lot of factors come into this place. Well, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, the last questions would be why the Germans changed the concept after the Leopard 1, because obviously the Leopard 2 is much more heavy. And I think this has a lot to do not so much with putting away the operations maneuver warfare. I would say this was still in mind in the 70s and 80s in the German army. But the fire control systems changed. They were much more precise. Yeah? They had lasers, they had computers, they had a lot of sensors to measurement of temperatures and stuff like this. And so the shot stabilizers were much more improved. And in altogether, this put fire control systems at those times in one shot, one hit wonders, let's say it like this. And in general, this ended the lightweight tanks. Yeah. Also, if you look at the French side, they had also lightweight tanks, but I think today it's not so much more the French concept of tank design.
And also composite armor was introduced in the meantime. I think it was also a factor to a certain degree that armor actually could help again.
I think the armor has, of course, it has to do with it, but I think it's more the fire control systems, because we are sitting here at on a Leopard 1, A1, A4.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not an A4, it's an A1, A4. And if you look at over the Leopards or even on the T55s or whatever, and you look what is the main improvement over the time, it's of course a little bit more armor and a little bit more engine also, maybe like this, but it's mostly fire control system. Yeah, suddenly they have a laser and then there is a computer and so on. So this is one of the major improvements over all the variants from Leopard 1 or T55 to have a better fire control system. So I think this is a not completely a game changer, but quite important to understand tank development in the middle of Cold War, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
But maybe Chieftain can criticize it also. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not that tank expert, but from my perspective, if I look at the tanks of those time and I try to look, what's the difference between a Leopard 1A1 and a 1A2 and a 1A3? There's nearly always a change in fire control system, improvement in fire control system.
Yeah, I mean, it's also rather easy to upgrade to a certain degree because it's sometimes a bit of a hardware, but a lot of times it's just a software update. And the software update is, well...
software update at those times.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was probably mostly firmware. I mean, well, the software and hardware was mostly melted.
I mean, remember on a lecture by Rolf Hilmes, who said in the 80s, the NATO had one major point on the Warsaw Pact, and those were the thermal sights, Wärmebildgeräte in German. And I have to say this is really important because thermal sights are not only important for night fighting, where you have a huge advance of infrared and stuff like this. It's also better on the day sights. You have a better capability to recognize enemy tanks over distances with thermal sights. Yeah. So this is, I wouldn't say it's a complete game changer, but it's really important to understand the combat power of a tank, stuff like this, which isn't the cannon, which isn't the mobility or other component of the holy trias.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and we get now interrupted. So thank you very much, Jens.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also a big thank you to the Militärhistorische Museum Dresden. And well, thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.